What's happening, everybody? All right, why didn't I buy the F-150? Well, I got to tell you guys, I came really close to picking up that F-150. As a matter of fact, last time I stepped foot in that Ford dealership, I had my checkbook with me. I was literally ready to put ink on paper. Just needed to work out a couple of the details, iron out a couple of kinks. Other than that, I'd have been the owner of an F-150, or at least the order would have been placed. But I took another trip to the Ram dealership, drove a truck that I actually fell in love with, and made me forget all about the Ford and made me realize that the things that I liked about the Ford were really kind of one-trick pony type things, whereas the Ram to me was a lot more well-rounded in terms of comfort, performance, and just the overall driving experience. The F-150 had one thing to offer, and that was what I thought was an exciting driving experience, maybe a little bit more of an exciting driving experience, but I found that I was actually even wrong about that. So let me bring you back to the main reason why. Number one was the ride of the truck. I've got some notes over here, so you might see me like glancing off, but for one, the first note that I had about the Ford F-150 in either four-wheel drive or two-wheel drive, the truck seemed twitchy. The suspension, whenever the road would get a little bit less than perfect, the truck had a hard time staying on the road. Expansion joints would upset that truck. Any slight undulation or dip, the truck seemed to be, how can I explain this? It either felt like it was oversprung, in other words, the springs were too stiff, or the shock rate was too high. The truck just felt, again, it felt high-strung, it felt bouncy, it just did not feel as well connected to the road. And that's something that I found to be really odd, because I've owned F-150s in the past, and I have ridden in F-150s that were great. It's just that the trucks that I drove didn't feel as well planted as the Ram or the Chevrolet for that matter. Now, I may be suffering by comparison, but of the three brands that I was seriously considering, the ride in the Ford was absolutely the worst. And it was unnecessarily bad by comparison. So that's one of the big key tipping points for me was the ride quality just wasn't all that great. And when I say that the truck was twitchy, let me give you an idea. Again, expansion joints or any spot where they were doing some level of construction in the road where the road surface wasn't that great, the truck had a weird tendency to either act like it wanted to bump steer, or the tires seemed like they were coming off the ground. The truck just literally would move around, whereas the Ram and the Chevrolet didn't do that, and I test drove those trucks on the exact same roads as I was test driving the F-150. It's not like this was something that was separated by time or distance. It was literally on the same roads because these dealerships are on the same highway within an exit of each other. So for me, the ride quality alone was enough to really turn me off. But it wasn't just the ride quality. Engine and transmission. So I test drove a 3.5 liter EcoBoost, and I also test drove a 5 liter. The big takeaway that I had from the EcoBoost was that, yes, they run really, really well, but I just have a hard time trusting small displacement boosted engines when you're dealing with a truck. And although many of you guys out there may have had and have had no problems with your EcoBoost engines, I know plenty of folks that have, personally. And when I spoke with technicians that happen to work on these things regularly, they were telling me to break wide from that EcoBoost platform. I said, okay, let's give the 5.0 a chance. Well, here's the weird thing about the 5.0. The 5 liter combination with the 10-speed and a 331 gear, to me, was a pretty decent mismatch. Let me explain to you why. That truck, with that engine and that gear, with a 10-speed automatic, eerily enough, the truck seemed to only use 3 or 4 gears while I was driving it. Again, heavy load, wide open, the truck would only use 2 gears to get to 60. Keep in mind, it's shifting at 65 miles per hour. But it did so being a bit lazy out of the hole. It just didn't have the punch, the drive that the Ram did down low, and that's a Ram with a 321 gear, by the way. On the highway, if you needed to step into the gear to pass somebody, even on partial throttle downshifts where typically you'd tip into the throttle and it'll downshift 1 or 2 gears and the truck pretty much advances forward after that, not wide open, you're not in it to win it, you're just trying to get moving. The Ram had no problem. Even the GM, with its lack of power, still didn't have a problem finding the right gear. But the Ford had an issue. It would downshift into a gear that just seemed like it was completely inappropriate for what was being asked of the truck. It was either very shallow, and then, in other words, it would maybe downshift 1 gear, and then you really had to get into the throttle to get it to downshift again, and then it would basically come unglued. The truck just felt like it was kind of going through rookie teething pains. It was like it had never seen it or done it before, and it was really weird because it's got all this enthusiasm with the engine, but the transmission was just kind of, I don't know. It left me wanting, at least in terms of refinement, and that's a big key factor for me. Spent a lot of time in my truck, a lot of time on the highway, and I don't want to feel like I'm in a truck that when you go to get into the throttle to get around somebody, that it's going to not really know what to do. I'll give you an example. I was in the truck, basic highway speeds, and I'm rolling into the throttle to get the thing to move, and it downshifts. But when it downshifted, this is a truck, by the way, that'll redline at 6,800 RPM, has shift points at around 65 or so. It downshifts into a gear that was 4,000 RPM, a place where that 5-liter just, it's completely out of its depth at that RPM. The Ram at that RPM is punchy. Now, the Ford really wasn't. And again, torque isn't that 5 liters calling card, pretty evident by dead stop takeoffs. But in this case, this is on the highway. And again, the transmission just felt like it was confused as to what it wanted to do, or at least it was confused as to what I was asking it to do. Really weird, extremely off-putting, and that is a trait that I absolutely could not live with long term. Now, let me reset that statement real quick, because I know what would fix it, or at least I feel like I know what would fix it, and that is the truck needs a different set of gears out back. The 331s, I just don't fit that 5-liter very well. It needs 373s or 410s, or hell, even 430s will get that thing really into the meat of its power band and allow it to act like the Dodge Ram, like the Chevy Silverado that I drove. It would at least allow that engine to have a fighting chance and get it into its power band. But you can't option the truck that I was looking to get with a 5-liter and 373 gears, which are the most aggressive gears that you can get from Ford in that configuration. And even then, you have to really step up to top trim levels to get that, which I felt was absolute nonsense. Look, Ram will let you get a 392 gear if you want one or need one in every trim level of their trucks. Tradesmen's, Lone Stars, it doesn't matter what it is. You can get a 392 gear if you want it or if you need it. You can't do that with the Ford. You're stuck with either a 315, which is not ideal for a 5-liter, or you're getting a 331. Again, not ideal with the 5-liter, especially when you consider the fact that the transmission ratios, you say, well, it's a 10-speed. Well, yeah, but the transmission ratios are actually less aggressive than the transmissions in the new DT Ram. The HP75 transmission, first, second, third, and fourth gear are more aggressive than the 10-speed that's in the Ford for first, second, third, and fourth gear. That makes a big difference, and it makes the trucks feel completely anemic, talking about the Ford here, down low and in these partial throttle acceleration conditions. So, taking all of that in, that's at least the truck's, that's the impression the truck left with me, is that it led with a really great engine. I loved the sound of the thing. Absolutely fell in love with the idea of what I could do with that truck. But unfortunately, it turned into more or less everything that I liked about the truck ended up being a reason why I didn't like it. Again, that engine revving to 65 or 6,800 RPM, that's adorable. But the problem is that when the transmission doesn't translate that kind of power to the rear wheels and to a driving experience, And I have no way to make that happen through gearing because, I mean, you got the gears. How can't you just put the gears in the truck? That would have made all the difference in the world, and ink would have dried on a Ford contract had they agreed to do that for me. And this is another thing. I don't really want to get into the dealership experience, but the dealership experience for me with the Ford was a close to last place. I worked with one guy, and then for whatever reason, he wasn't at work the other times that I had shown up at that Ford dealership. I was doing this after work. The earliest I could get there was around 5:30. The guy was never there, and I felt like I was kind of working with the B team or the C team. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's not the truck's fault. The main thing is that dealership didn't want to work with me. Wanted to, by the way, and this does have something to do with the manufacturer, wanted to make me feel like they were doing me a favor by selling me this truck at sticker. Oh, well, we'll take $1,000 off because you're putting an order together. Are you kidding me? Really? Ram, on the other hand, was throwing incentives at me left and right, coming up with creative incentives. Oh, you want tinted windows? Oh, you want this done? You want that done? Listen, it's all part of the deal. Heavy incentives plus the other stuff that we will throw in for free. If you like the truck, you got to get one on the lot, but we will take good care of you. And they did. And I mean really good care of me at that. So between the unwillingness to work with the customer on price, much less being thoroughly confused as to why I would want a set of 373 gears, and also not having the ability to work with the customer in terms of putting a truck together that I was wanting, regardless of what your configurator thing says, I had no other choice but to walk out of that dealership without a signed contract. And as much as it pains me, it really does pain me, because I really did have my heart set on putting together a build with an F-150, and the only thing that really kept me from going back one last time was that I found the absolute perfect truck for me in a Ram. And in a way, I got to thank Ford for putting me into the Ram 1500 that I bought, because had they wanted to play ball, I'd be singing a completely different tune. I'm getting this F-150 with the 373 gear, the 5-liter, extended cab, and all this other stuff. I'd be bringing that to you and giving you a glowing review of this F-150 with all the cool hot rod stuff you can do with it. And I was even willing to accept the lesser ride quality for the performance that I was going to be able to get out of that truck. But then after I drove the Ram, and the Ram runs really good too, and it does truck stuff great just as well as the Ford, without all of the extra issues with poor ride quality and twitchiness and weird downshift strategies. It does all of it so well that, man, to be honest with you, I kind of forgot all about the F-150. So look, I don't want y'all to think that I'm bashing on that Ford. I really, really wanted that truck. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get it the way that I wanted to get the truck in terms of a configuration, and add to that the fact that it was the worst riding truck out of the entire group, had the weirdest issues with the downshift strategy, it was tied with being the softest off the line with the GM. Obviously the 5-liter comes on real strong after about 2 seconds of being lazy, but you kind of get where I'm going with this. The Ram was strong everywhere, and wherever I would have to make a compromise with the Ram in terms of performance, it would more than make up with in terms of ride quality and everything else that I would love about that truck. And by the way, ain't that big of a difference in terms of performance on the street, at least for what I'm doing with it anyway. So with that, post up your comments, let me know what you think. Have you driven one of the new F-150s? Did you come away with the same impression, or did you find it to be significantly different than how I'm describing it to you? I've owned F-150s. The new F-150s seem to not be better than what I had before, and by comparison was considerably worse in terms of comfort, noise, vibration, and harshness type of things as well. Let me know what you guys think. Love to hear your comments. And with that, that's a wrap. Adios.